Do you remember that time on water rats when you died?
Well, yeah.
Oh, I'll never forget. That was intense, man. What are you doing today, by the way?
Well, talk about intense. I'm just having a look at the first 48 hours of when someone sort of comes in contact with a coroner's court. What are the first things that happen to them? Who do they meet? Wow. And what sort of things are they asked?
That is intense, because I remember when you died on water rats and Steve Bisley went through that process.
Well, I didn't watch it. As soon as I died, it was over for me.
Well, he was very good.
Look, I'm fairly new to this, I don't really know much about, and that's been the whole process. So I was hoping that we could start by just you explaining to me, what is it you do? How do you start your day, and how does it begin? And
Okay.
Yeah.
So I manage two areas. I manage the Coronial Admissions Inquiries Office and also the mortuary.
Yeah.
But my day basically begins by arriving, and I go through all the cases that have been reported for the last 24 hours.
Uh-huh. How many cases usually?
So usually approximately 10 to 15.
10 to 15 for one night?
Generally, yeah, for one night. Over the weekend, last weekend, we may have had 40 odd cases.
That's for the whole of Victoria?
Whole of Victoria. So they're cases where a doctor hasn't signed a death certificate, that have died suddenly or unexpectedly.
Right.
Or due to an accident. So they're not just homicides. A lot of people think that we just investigate suspicious deaths, but no, there are a whole wide range of cases.
So a doctor will only sign a certificate if he knows exactly how a person died or why a person died?
Where they're comfortable, yes, based on probability that they generally know why a person has died.
Right. And if not, they...
If they refuse to sign a certificate, then a person can't be buried or cremated in Victoria, so they must be reported to a coroner. So without a certificate, no one can be buried or cremated, so they have to be reported to us.
So you take those cases in the morning?
My staff over the weekend or overnight would have taken phone calls from police, funeral directors or doctors, most of the time police, where someone's gone to a home or something's happened and the police have discovered someone deceased. And we'll organise the transfer of that body of the deceased to us at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine.
Right, right.
And once it arrives, it undertakes a whole lot of processes in the mortuary. So while that body is in the mortuary, there's a whole lot of other processes which the Coronial Admissions Inquiries, the nurses, will be following up. Yes.
So what is the Coronial Admissions Inquiries?
So that's the initial reporting office.
Right.
So that's the office that's staffed by nurses and executive assistants that answer all phone calls taken by police, funeral directors and doctors,
right.
and also by families. So they do the entire initial investigation and receiving of all that information, and then liaise with the coroner and our pathologists to follow up on the processes while the deceased person is in our care in the mortuary.
Why would a family call you? I understand why the police and everything, but why would a family call?
So there's a couple of reasons. First of all, a phone call may be made from a family. Sometimes we even get a phone call from somebody that is just looking for somebody. They think it's the old city morgue.
Yes,
They thought that it was the city morgue. I need to find it. Sometimes that. But more often than not, a police member has turned up to their home and told them that their child or their brother, sister, husband has been killed in a car accident or an accident has occurred. They hand them our number and then say, ring them to find out what next.
Right.
So
and
then
what's the balance then if you're dealing with family members like that? I mean, it's you're not a counselling service, but you're dealing with people who are you're almost their first point of call.
So it's a real balance about that counselling.
Yeah.
But what we've found and what we've been told is those first 48 hours, and that's what we deal with a lot, is really that first time that grief is really, really setting in. So it's almost sometimes within an hour they've only just been told, even sometimes 30 minutes, just been told somebody died. What they're looking for from us is facts. And trying to just make sense of what steps. So what we've found that even though they may not be able to process everything, for us to calmly explain to them step by step, right, this is what's going to happen in the next hour, this is what's going to happen in the next 2 hours, this is what's going to happen in the next 2 days. And each time we just explain to them, we will ring you back. Is there someone to speak to? And we just explain what's going to happen in the next 48 hours.
Well, it's the very first thing that happens when a deceased person is brought into our care. A coroner and a forensic pathologist will have a duty meeting when cases are presented, and it's an opportunity for them to have a discussion, sometimes a robust discussion, in respect of the appropriateness of the investigations that should follow. And so the forensic pathologist will have done a computed topography examination of the person and will be able to say to the coroner, well, I'm able to formulate a cause of death, or actually I'm not able to formulate a cause of death. If they're not able to formulate a cause of death, then there's a range of investigative options that are open, and the coroner will listen to that advice and work out whether or not to make a direction for an autopsy or a partial autopsy or toxicology tests. And the test that the coroner has to always apply is whether it's necessary to make that order, and is it appropriate in the circumstances. So if there are family concerns that have been raised about whether an autopsy should be conducted, the coroner will certainly be taking those concerns into account when determining whether to make that direction or not.
So I guess the first stage is the death is reported to us.
Who reports that death?
Generally it's the police or a hospital. So I think that comes back to what's reportable and what isn't, and having an understanding of that. But most of the time it's those two bodies.
Well, when we ring, people generally think that I'm the coroner. I have to explain that I'm a medical liaison nurse, I'm not the coroner, and that my role is to explain to them the process and to find out how they feel if the coroner was to order an autopsy. That's an important question we need to ask in that initial conversation.
So you're saying how would they feel if not? Yes.
So the reason we do that is because the coroner does take that into consideration when they're trying to decide whether or not they will order an autopsy. So some families really don't want to have an autopsy, and it may be for religious purposes, it may be that they're elderly, it may be they feel that they've gone through enough. And the coroner will look at that and decide whether or not they can find a cause of death without that, or if the family are happy to receive what's called an unascertained cause of death, which means they won't receive a cause of death.
Yeah. So, but you don't counsel the people on the phone what the best way to fall is. You completely just take it from how they're feeling.
Yeah. And if somebody's unsure, that's what we say to them. We say, if you're unsure, would you like to just be guided by the coroner? Because they're not locked into that decision.
No.
That's our next phone call.
Yeah, right.
So
how often do you talk to a family, through the process of the body being here?
2 phone calls.
Only 2?
2. I know, it doesn't sound like very much at all, does it? I know. So generally there's 2 phone calls. There's the first family contact, where we call them to explain the process, and then there's the second family contact. So that's the second time we talk to them. That's to let them know the results of the coronial meeting. So we come out of that with either a cause of death, which I then explain to them what that is, and we go into further detail if they need it, or there's a request for an autopsy. So what's your day like? Like, you come here and are you just given a case, or do you know what you're in for in the day, or what?
So it depends on what role you have. So if you're the on-call pathologist, so we have a few different roles. So the on-call pathologist is on-call for 7 days, usually for suspicious deaths, which is what we use this room for. So you really don't know what's going to happen over that period of time. You can get called at any time during the night. You might have to go to a scene.
You're on 24-hour call for 7 days.
Yeah. But it can be very quiet, or it can be very busy. And so we'll get a phone call from the CE and the police to let us know that something's happened, and we'll liaise with the police if they want us to attend a scene, for example, because sometimes we we can help them with information at the scene, or we can help with taking samples at the scene. Even critical measurements, for example, body temperatures at the scene might be important. But also the context in which someone's died in that scene environment can be quite informative to us when we're trying to reconstruct what happened to that person. So they might want us to go there, or maybe the person's actually died in hospital. There's been an incident and they've made it to hospital but they've died, and so there's no real scene for us to go to. So then we'll do that autopsy with the police here.
Right.
Looking on, and everything is kind of photographed and trace evidence specimens are taken. And those autopsies can take a long time, but it's not the actual autopsy part, it's actually getting all the specimens, making sure everything's documented so that from a legal point of view the case is tight.
Yeah, right.
And that is often the most time-consuming part of those cases. Yeah. So that's if you're the on-call pathologist. We have the duty pathologist who basically processes the cases that have come in the last 24 hours. In terms of that triage process, like having a meeting with the coroner and basically discussing the case and working out which is the best level of investigation to basically assist the coroner in determining cause of death and how death occurred, and even identification.
Not all deaths that come are suspicious.
No, not at all. No,
Yeah.
not at all. So the majority of deaths that we have aren't. I would say less than 5% are actually suspicious. So so people have died suddenly at home, sort of accidents or suicides, drug-related deaths, and people have died in hospital where the cause isn't clear, or they've died as a result of surgery or anaesthesia. So there's a whole spectrum of cases that we get. In terms of routine work, so if you're just on for routine cases, we usually, pathologists will do like 3 cases a day. And we will, basically we've got a case management system, so before the pathologist comes to do their autopsy, review the police report, so the circumstances under which the person died, if they have medical history that needs to be assessed, and also they'll have a look at the CT scan as well, just to sort of inform your approach to the autopsy and what areas you need to specifically target to find the answer.
Yeah, how long does an autopsy take? I know it takes because of the process, but the actual...
Yeah, the actual physical autopsy, like a standard case, 45 minutes.
Is that all?
But complex cases can take several hours, so it really depends on case complexity. So, for example, someone who's died suddenly at home, who doesn't have a complex medical or surgical history, that can be relatively rapid. Particularly if there aren't many abnormalities on the CT scan, then you go to examine the person's heart and you see that they have heart disease. But if it's a complex post-surgical case, then that can take several hours.
So you've been saying you've been doing it for 13 years, and so do you find that it just becomes a series of bodies? Do you see the individual anymore, or is it your job, or is it just your work?
I mean, in a sense, what anyone does every day becomes routine. That's just, and in order to kind of cope with some of the extreme things that you see, you have to accept that things become routine. But at the end of the day, there's always kind of a family at the end of all of that. And we do, from time to time, meet with families. CAE also have very close contact with families at really difficult times. And it's having those connections, I think, that actually keeps you grounded into what it is that you're actually doing. And so I find particularly meeting with families a very grounding experience. Sometimes it can be quite traumatic because they're angry, sometimes they're grieving quite often, and they don't understand why this has happened to them. And whilst that can be confronting, it also kind of grounds you and makes you realise why it is you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it sort of makes it alive.
Really?
Absolutely. It makes it the human connections are still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in suspicious cases, when we eventually, go to court, if they're a court proceeding, the family are all there, and so it just reminds you that this is what you do is a small part in a much kind of bigger picture, and it's just really important to do that small part the best that you can.
How do you start your day? What happens when you become,
we normally start around 8 in the morning, and what we do is we screen for potential donors. We try and identify people who might be able to donate tissue through the donor tissue bank.
And who are those people that could potential?
The reason, or the way that the tissue bank was originally set up, we're part of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, and because of that, we actually have access to the information that the coroner receives. So we're able to identify people that way. So we have potentially around many thousands of people who are reported to the coroner every year, and we can look at the information. It can be medical information, it can be information that comes in with the police report, and we can get a bit of an idea about the suitability or the potential for a person to be a donor.
But what is that suitability? What is the thing that you're looking for?
Yeah, so well, there's a number of different things, and one of the main things is the age criteria. So anywhere between 3 months and 70 years of age, someone can potentially be a tissue donor.
Well, that's almost everyone,
yeah,
really, isn't
absolutely.
it? Yeah,
and
yeah.
What we say to people when they ask about, am I suitable to be a donor or anything like that, we just say, don't censor yourself. Lots of things change your ability to be a donor, but just if you can read about the information, find out as much as you can, make your decision about what you want to donate, whether it's organs, tissues and eyes, cornea, or all of them. It could be any one of those or all of them. But the most important thing is let your family know what your decision is, because that's the person we'll speak to, your senior next of kin, at the time of your death.
So that senior next of kin, that you have had to have told them you want to, or can they make a decision?
Well, the Human Tissue Act is a piece of legislation that supports us in our work. If someone has said that they want to that they want to donate, either in writing or verbally, and there's some provisos with that, then we could act on that. But we always consult with families, with the next of kin, because we actually speak with them and find out other health information in relation to that donor. And it's important that we get a feel for the family's comfort with that, bearing in mind that tissue donation can only take place within 24 hours of circulatory death. We are dealing with someone, most likely it's their very worst day of their life. So it's a delicate area, it's a difficult area, and families are already emotionally quite raw. So we don't want to be adding to their grief. We want to be able to offer them something positive, or something that might give them a bit of relief, perhaps not on the day, but in the future, knowing that their loved one was able to help another
So
person.
are you the person that goes and talks to the family?
Yep, I'm part of a team of nurses, so we're all nurses.
Is that your background,
yes,
nursing?
Yeah, we're all nurses. And we've obviously had further training or further support in becoming tissue donation nurse specialists. We do all of the assessment, and we consult with the forensic pathologists, and we also consult with the coroner as well as the senior next of kin. So it's a very controlled process. There's a lot of consultation and a lot of discussion along and through those.
But it has to happen within 24 hours.
It does, yeah.
Do you ever follow some of that tissue to the next stage?
To the release?
Yeah, well, where it goes.
Yeah, we actually receive letters from recipients to pass on to the families. They're signed with their first name, but we get some beautiful letters, and they really realise the impact, where the tissue has come from, and that they wouldn't be doing what they're doing now if it wasn't for the generosity of that family at such an awful time. So it's really lovely, and sometimes we'll have donor families who write back to those recipients, and there's an exchange thereafter, which is really lovely.
Oh God, it's been 20.
You've been here the whole time.
Oh my God, it only feels like 24 hours.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's
48.
been 48. Oh, well, how'd you go?
Well, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people involved, depending on which journey you go.
Okay, what was the most intense bit?
It was all pretty intense, I must say. But the great thing is that you feel like you're in really good hands. Those people are so compassionate, so highly educated and specific about their jobs that, I think you'll be all right.